Flyzik.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in securing cyberspace. With me today on the show are Mr. Henry Sienkiewicz, the Vice Chief Information Assurance Executive at DISA. Mr. Jeff Eisensmith, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Joe Albaugh, the Associate CIO and Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Transportation. Mr. Marty Roesch, the Interim CEO at Sourcefire. Mr. Charles Croom, the Vice President of Cybersecurity Solutions for Lockheed Martin, Information Systems and Global Solutions. And Mr. Ken Kartsen, the VP Federal at McAfee. Let's get into the issues. Let's start with Henry Sienkiewicz at DISA. Henry, let's talk a little bit about, can you cite some examples where you think, I mean, we've been talking cybersecurity now for years. It's a priority. People are, talking about the threats. Can you cite some areas where you think we're making some real progress in this area?
Sure, Jim, and actually thanks on behalf of the entire agency for being here. I mean, this is always a great venue for us to help communicate all of the initiatives that are going on inside of both DISA and the rest of the Defense Department.
Well, thank you. That's what it's meant to be, a way to get the word out.
And so when we look at this, we look at this volume, velocity, and variety of cyber threats that are hitting our environment. And when we look at it, I mean, I think we've got 5 areas that we've done really well on, and we're going to continue to see a press. First of all is in the area of continuous monitoring and our ability to reduce that manual work so that we remove the individual, the human factor, and increase that machine-to-machine blocking and tackling of the threat vectors.
Right.
The second one is in the area of PKI and how we're going to ensure the authentication and drive out anonymity inside, especially inside the classified fabric. The third area is on cyber workforce and how are we training and equipping, because the people are absolutely critical in this process. The fourth area is this operationalization of the cyber threat and how we're defending inside cyberspace. I mean, we recognize that cyberspace is a new warfighting domain. And when we look at it, we've ensured that our warfighters and our combatant commanders are using the best practices to defend the networks as part of their day-to-day operational practices. And the fifth one is that how are we trying to decompose the complexity of the environment? And you're seeing that in the initiatives that Mr. Kai is running with the Joint Information Environment, and how are we going to remove some of the complexity to ensure transparency to allow greater visibility of these assets?
Yeah, great answers. It sounds, as we've been doing these shows over the years, we've watched this evolution occur, and we've gone from more of reactive to more of proactive approaches. Before we were fixing things after they broke. Now we're trying to get out in front of that curve to try to prevent things from happening. Jeff Eisensmith over at Department of Homeland Security, congratulations on the new job that's moving over. What are some of the examples where you see progress being made in securing cyberspace?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, I would say the continuous monitoring
big issue
is really a big step up for us. I would say that in these contentious times, the White House and Congress have both agreed to the tune of $193 million that continuous monitoring is something that is important. It has backing, it has legs, and it's moving out. This year, the effort for continuous diagnostics and mitigation should be rolled out, and being able to make that offering up, to bring the price down for all the services, for all the federal space, is going to be a big thing for us. Mm-hmm. And I would say hot on the heels of continuous monitoring is going to be Fedramp. So for the first time, we're going to go ahead and accredit cloud space.
Right.
Everyone is going to be able to be able to reap the benefit of that shared accreditation. Mm-hmm. Right. So between DHS and GSA and DOD, Fedramp is going to be an enormous boon.
Sure.
So just the simple efficiencies of being able to share that now, state, local, tribal, is going to be phenomenal. Mm-hmm. So you accredit it once, everybody reaps the benefits.
Right.
And that's going to be huge for us.
Yeah. The good thing, I guess, is some of the points you're bringing up is even though we're in like a ridiculously tight budget climate, it seems like cybersecurity remains to be a priority on both sides of the aisle there, no matter what your political point of view is. And the Fedramp idea, I mean, the more you can do as a government-wide thing and pool those resources so everyone's not doing duplicative stuff makes a lot of sense from a taxpayer standpoint for one. General Croom, over at Lockheed, you've got the luxury of working both sides of issues with a long distinguished career in the military and now at Lockheed Martin. What are some of the areas where you see progress being made in cybersecurity as you're working to help government customers, address these issues?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Jim. It's great to talk about progress because I think we are making some. Within Lockheed Martin, we've come to recognize that cybersecurity is in everything we do. Whether it's building platforms or writing software, we take it seriously, and it's really the foundation now of how we approach development. But we clearly see a greater understanding of the threat. That understanding of the threat at Lockheed Martin has actually changed the way our processes are developed now and the way we secure ourselves. We have what we call an intel-driven defense and the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, which has altered almost everything we do in terms of how we defend ourselves. Awareness is up. With not only within our folks who work within the company, but we see it, I think, across the board. We're now seeing universities teach it at schools. We host high school students, so the awareness is up. Companies are doing this now. We're seeing much faster response times, I think, to the cybersecurity incidents. We're seeing law enforcement for the first time starting arresting people. So I think we're at the beginning of a new cycle in the way we address cybersecurity.
Yeah, terrific. I do, and I agree with you because having taught at the graduate level cybersecurity myself at the University of Maryland, the course would sell out every year, like minutes after it would be announced. And since then, the curve of the number of students enrolling in classes has skyrocketed. So there's definitely a recognition that it's a career growth field.
And they see a job market out there, and they're now starting to put some strength in that curriculum.
Absolutely, absolutely. Joe Albaugh over at Department of Transportation. What are some of the areas where you see progress being made in improving cybersecurity from where you sit, Joe?
Thank you, Jim. The stuff that's been mentioned already certainly is, I completely agree with the progress across government and the interactions with industry. What I was also thinking about and reflecting on as I was listening to these gentlemen was about how that relates to the progress within the department, specifically within the area that I'm looking at, how to actually apply that stuff, and if progress and awareness is being felt across the department, how does that relate internal to the operating administrations, to the actual folks who do the work within our group. So. We've taken the continuous monitoring initiatives and we've applied it to 9 of the operating administrations already in an effort to try to automate some of those mechanisms to kind of get it out of that static sort of exercise and move it into something that's more real time and operational. In use of the PIV cards and having folks who have been provided with the physical badge trying to move to something logical, we've sort of move the ball forward even in our multifunction printers and getting PIV card access to them to show them some of the value add of that sort of strong authentication. And also in our telework force, we're really looking at improving the experience securely for our telework force, and so looking at virtual technologies and sandboxing for the department holistically, so that in situations where it's not feasible for them to maybe show up to work that they can telework in.
Yeah, great stuff too. And I agree that PIV card, and we've had this discussion several times. We do a show on identity management. If we can just get that authentication and identity, and you just get that nailed, so many other things fall in place so nicely if you can get that one issue nailed down. Ken Kartsen over at McAfee. Where are you seeing from where you look supporting your government customers? Where do you see progress being made?
Thank you, Jim. I think everybody's pretty spot on with a lot of the different realities we're approaching. With continuous monitoring, one of the most important things I see from that perspective is the integration of all these different tools and components to try to deliver an automated security solution around all the assets that we have. The other thing that I think has been critical, and it's not necessarily the security industry moving forward, but it's the infrastructure and assets of a lot of our customers. They're starting to consolidate, whether that means going to the cloud, whether that means something like JIE, where they're looking for common platforms. If you have commonality within your environment, it's a lot easier to have a repeatable process around securing that environment. And I think the last thing, and maybe one of the biggest for our future, is around that identity piece.
Right.
And how do we take software, hardware, and identity and pull that all together so that we have a common understanding of who is actually getting on that machine, whether that machine is a mobile device, a laptop, a desktop. If we understand who that person is and their identity, we can much better protect the information, the assets associated with it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I still, once again, believe that's just such a key issue for so many issues. And it's important to the general population with identity theft and things like that for that positive identification. Marty Roesch, interim CEO over at Sourcefire. What do you see as, where do you see progress being made? Where are we getting ahead of this curve?
Thanks, Jim. What we're seeing right now is we've seen a lot of development in kind of the understanding on the part of the industry and the users that are out there regarding just the level of awareness that you have to have of the types of threats that you're facing, how pernicious they are, and how likely you are to be hit by them. Most people think, well, advanced persistent threats are never coming after me. And what we're seeing is that, in fact, they are going after not just our government customers, but after, all levels of customers that we deal with. So people are becoming aware that, it doesn't matter what you're doing. These guys are very interested in whatever it is that you have that's not nailed down that they can steal. So that's been very positive, is people understanding that this threat does include them. They are within the scope of the guys who are attacking us to go after, which is making people get realistic about what they need to do to defend themselves. So you've got that going on, and you also have we have an environment now where people are starting to understand what's required to actually have effective defenses against the modern threats that they face in terms of being able to do things like continuous monitoring and also transitioning from straight set-piece defenses that we've classically had, like firewalls or even first-generation intrusion prevention systems, and starting to get into being able to deliver continuous capabilities around dealing with the threats that we face today. So, you can even look to Gartner. They're starting to say things like, network security needs to be environmentally aware and context-enabled to be effective these days. Right. So when you have a voice that is very powerful, both with customers and with vendors saying stuff like that, it really helps drive things forward when we're talking about dealing with the threats that people actually face today.
Right, terrific, well said. And I think you brought home some of the points. I think Joe did too, about it's not just the security people, it's like awareness that everybody's playing in this game here, that everyone's got to have the awareness to secure their computer assets and so forth. Let's go to Jeff Eisensmith. Jeff, we talked about progress being made. What's priorities for the upcoming year? What's on your top list of to-dos in terms of things you're looking to do this year?
Okay, so it will certainly be to continue on with continuous monitoring,
which is a hot topic.
The challenges that I have are the fact that the IT budgets across the department are somewhat flat because of the fiscal constraints we have this year. In that environment, it doesn't make sense to do all things because you just don't have the bandwidth, the resources to do that. So there's something called ongoing reauthorization, right? It's a way for the risk executive to take a look at the limited resources that they have, take a look at the 853 controls that come out of NIST, and make an intelligent decision that says, at this time, the limited resources, I'm going to focus what I have on continuous monitoring, but I'm going to downplay some of the traditional A130 type of audit functions. You can't do that in a laissez-faire kind of cavalier way. It has to be done with rigor.
Right.
That's where I'm going to focus a lot of my attention this year. The other focus will be on cybersecurity awareness within the workforce. The wetware
Right.
is really where a lot of the problems come from.
Right.
Right? So if you can really have a kind of a playful way to engage them in dialogue, get them to understand what their role is, they can become a really good force factor to help you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we don't have time on the show to talk about it. We could get, we got into mobility and wireless and bring your own device and all those kinds of security issues, and then throw in cloud and managed service and whatever. I mean, the issues are complicated. So I think you're right. You got to pick and choose the things that you think are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck in the short run. Joe Albaugh, what do you think? What's on your list of to-dos for the next year in terms of priorities?
Well, Jim, certainly, the continuous monitoring is part of the president's agenda.
Sure.
So we'll continue moving forward on TIC and stronger authentication. One of the things that's been of interest, and you mentioned mobility and cloud, and so there are initiatives out there where we're looking to implement solutions that are cloud-based or cloud-first opportunities. And also on the mobility front. And so one of the things I'm interested in is the stronger authentication requirements that we have in areas of mobility where PIV is not feasible as a solution.
Right.
So how can we look at risk-based, strong authentication mechanisms that may not suit well with PIV card or PKI infrastructures? And so that's another thing we're looking at as a way of offering solutions to our customers, rather than being perceived as that impediment that security sometimes does. All the reasons why, the no because rather than
That's
the
right.
yes if.
That's I had when I was the CIO at Treasury. That was my standard thing with my Chief Information Security Officer. No wasn't acceptable. Figure out how to get it done within a secure environment was the answer. Not no, you can't do it.
We want to move to yes if. We certainly,
and I'll tell you, cloud no brings up because it actually breaks the risk factor out a little bit, because you're going to be, especially if you're talking public clouds, there's going to be a trust factor now with whomever's providing some of those services, and it's going to take some interesting service level agreements and things like that. That'll be a challenge for acquisition workforce to get in place in some cases. Henry, what do you think? What's the priorities for the year over at DISA for you?
Actually, Jim, a great question. I'm going to echo some of the responses already that we've already heard. Although I'm going to go back to the cyber workforce. I mean, the term wetware was just used, but I mean, how do we train and equip all of these individual warriors? I mean, you are seeing inside the construct the development of Cybercom as a full operational combating commander. And you're also seeing the development of the cyber protection workforce.
Sure.
And we're looking at this actually in conjunction with all of the partners here as a whole of government effort and to support our defend the nation approach and the role of the department inside that construct. So beyond just cybersecurity workforce, it's the expanding of those enterprise defenses inside of JIE. The mobility issue is huge. DISA is piloting for the DoD CIO and the senior leaders a whole series of mobility devices. And how do we protect those endpoints? How do we make sure that as we're delivering this new capability, we're able to ensure that they're secure and reliable on all of the fabrics, not just the unclassified fabric, but also on the classified networks? Cloud brokers, and how are we going to be able to use and leverage Fedramp in conjunction with all of the other DISA services? Absolutely critical. You've heard continuous monitoring. You'll keep hearing us talking about continuous monitoring. And actually, we're very lucky. We've got a lot of support and focus from the Hill to ensure that we actually execute on continuous monitoring. And then two other things that I don't think we've really discussed that much. How do we go and use threat-based operations and threat-based engineering? How do we look at the use cases on what are those vectors that are coming at us? And then the final one is supply chain risk management. How are we going to use some of these other ongoing initiatives to ensure that we've got integrity and reliability inside the supply chain? Yeah,
Excellent. Very, very excellent point there, too, again. And especially that supply chain thing. We've heard so many different stories now of counterfeit products and malicious code showing up in different products and so forth and so forth. I want to hear from all of our industry guests on the same question. But first, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Henry Sienkiewicz from DISA, Jeff Eisensmith from Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, Joe Albaugh from Department of Transportation, Marty Roesch from Sourcefire, General Charles Croom from Lockheed Martin Information Systems and Global Solutions, and Ken Kartsen from VP from McAfee. We're talking cybersecurity. When we went to break, we had heard from our government guests. Let's hear from our industry experts here a little bit about priorities for the upcoming year in light of everything that's going on. Let's start with Marty. Marty, what are your priorities for the upcoming year?
So this year, Sourcefire is working very hard on our network platforms. We have one universal platform for delivering our network security technologies called Firepower. So we're working on keeping our Firepower platform at the leading edge of the performance envelope that people expect to see in their environment. Firepower is one of the most powerful and fastest platforms for doing network security out there. So we're working very diligently on that. We have our next generation firewall, which has been in the market for about a year now. We're continuing to expand the capabilities of that technology. And then we have our new advanced malware prevention technologies, which we fielded last year as well. We're integrating more platforms into that. So, for example, you should be able to expect to see us take on more desktop platforms this year. And we're also working to start integrating the viewpoints of our network-based and our endpoint-based technologies, our device-based technologies, so that I can have one unified view across my network, my mobile devices, endpoints, and virtual data centers as well, and be able to deliver what we call continuous capability across all phases of the threat environments that people face. So that's kind of our core direction this year, and it's all built around this idea of visibility and control that we drive at Sourcefire.
Reducing the complexity too, because sometimes when you look at this issue, it just seems so complicated that you got to figure out a way. How do I even get my hands around all this to get rolling on this?
That's exactly the back.
And it's great to have it come out with a new firewall. I used to always kid people. I used to always say it's a shame that we even have something called a firewall, because if software were built to be secure in the first place, we wouldn't need firewalls to protect against the software. But but it's good to know that they're out there and doing that protection. Charlie Croom, how about over Lockheed? What's on your hot list for the year that you think are some priorities that Lockheed needs to address to help your customers move forward?
Well, Jim, in the last few years, we've really been emphasizing talent and process over tools.
Okay.
We believe the future is in talent and process when it comes to cybersecurity.
Good points.
That has really led us to alter the way we approach cybersecurity, and we've been really, I think, trying to better understand and develop an intelligence-driven defense capability, which has led us to our Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So clearly we're going to continue that emphasis. But obviously we hear our customers loud and clear on continuous monitoring,
right,
and we want to be able to support them in their efforts to implement that capability. But we still have some difficult problems within our own industry. Our supply chain, for example, securing our supply chain is really important to us. It's a priority. And then as our customers move from their desktops to a more mobile platform, cloud and mobility and the securing of those two areas are critical to us.
Yeah, great. Certainly enough issues out there to address. Ken Kartsen over McAfee. What's on your list of priorities for the year, Ken?
Yes, thank you, Jim. I think it's twofold. One, as I mentioned earlier, is integrating identity with the chip level and getting underneath the operating system. That's hugely important to McAfee as an Intel-based company. Second is driving down operational costs while improving security.
Yeah, boy, that's an important one right now.
Absolutely. So if you look at most of our customers, a lot of them, they have McAfee, but they also have other technologies. And how do you bring this all together? If you look at the ERP systems of the 90s, for example, you had HR, you had payroll, you have accounts receivable, accounts payable. You had this mishmash of systems out there. And eventually we got to an integrated platform, whether you chose that to be Oracle or SAP.
Right.
I think security has to get there. The difficulty has always been around, what's that new threat, and is there technology to protect you against that threat? What we're trying to do at McAfee and through our partnerships with about 150 different companies is be that platform that can utilize all those other investments you've already made. When we get on site, it's already integrated together. We're not trying to integrate it for you when we get there. And what we're trying to do to expand on that this year, and we did a lot of this last year, but this year the big thing is not just the platform that it rides on, the management infrastructure, but also the information that protects you. So to use our platforms and open them up. So if you have other investments where you have critical information or you have classified information that you want to integrate into the platforms that you have through McAfee, you can do that more successfully.
Yeah, it's interesting that costing, and I've been writing some articles on this subject matter and been talking about what we really need to find is, over the years we've been doing all these Band-Aid approaches. There's so many products out there that have been fixing problems as they occur. What we really need is a solution that you can implement and get rid of a lot of those Band-Aid solutions so you can reduce all the operational costs associated with all that stuff that's been implemented over the years and come out with a platform that crosses maybe open architectures that cross over and do away with a lot of those things as a way of introducing something that reduces cost in other places to move forward. Let's switch topics a little bit now. Let's talk about the things that are really hard to do, the challenges, the things that are difficult yet, things that you're facing that you need to overcome in order to get where you want to go. Let's start with Joe Albaugh this time over at Department of Transportation. Joe, what are some of the key challenges that you feel you've still got to get over in order to get where you want to go?
And I think you sort of touched on it, you reflected on it a little bit, of the complexity of getting your hands around everything. Well, think of the human aspect of that. So the program executives and senior leadership that we support, the lexicon of our world is bits and bytes and binary, and in their world they sort of glaze over when you get to that level. And I've heard it from many program executives. They want the plain language version of what you're trying to explain to them. And I think culturally, that's one of the big things that we need to overcome is that cultural challenges in understanding the world we live in and how to normalize the information so it makes sense to the program executives. In the absence of that, it is wait for somebody to slap me on the hand or tell me I did wrong, and hopefully I'll understand it then. Or
that is a great point. Just the conversation with executives is difficult. I mean, I remember going in, I would take my security officer and they're talking about, flipping bits and, and hexadecimal this and, and the executives would be, what's he talking about? So that is a real challenge. And even in the private sector, let's face it, CEOs are concerned about stockholders' equity, generating revenue, reducing costs. So when you go in and talk about we need to invest a whole lot of money in security, first question, how will it impact our stock price? How will it generate revenue? How will it reduce costs? Tough questions. But on the other hand, I think we're going to see companies emerging that will be seen as trusted entities, if indeed they do have good security in place, and those that don't are going to be struggling down the road. Henry, what do you think in terms of DISA? What are some of the real big challenges you think that we face today? Sure.
Thanks, Jim. It's a great question. I want to echo something that Marty said a little bit when he was discussing one of the other questions. I think the first and foremost one is how do we ensure that we have situational awareness? The complexity that we have inside this environment is enormous. We've onboarded all sorts of technologies. We have coalition partners. We have the rest of the whole of government that we're trying to help. And we can't defend what we can't see. Right. And we've got to ensure that we're able to see. And that's through the reduction of complexity, through the JIE and other efforts. And even within inside that DoD space, it's a hard issue. When we add the .coms, when we add the mobilities, when we add this whole global nature, it becomes our biggest challenge. And finding the right way so that we have that pane of glass to be able to see what's going on and how it impacts the combatant commanders for us is absolutely critical. The next one is that how do we ensure that threat information is directly engineered into our systems? Going back to these use cases, how do we ensure that we've got the best engineering practices and we have the rigor inside our software development process to allow threat information and use cases to be injected at the very beginning of the discussion and not thought of as an add-on? And the final one, and you've heard us all addressing this already, is the change in culture. We've talked about operational security. We've talked about communication security. I would posit there's a thing called cybersec, where there's cybersecurity, and it's just part ingrained in the day-to-day workflow of all of us in this environment. And the final one is enterprise services. I mean, when we're developing enterprise email and enterprise portals and collaboration, how do we ensure that we're able to deliver these securely and effectively?
Right. And that's where the culture issue really comes into play, when you're relying on others, perhaps, in some of these environments. Jeff, what do you think some of the big challenges that you're facing with over there? Homeland's such an easy place to understand, no complexities there. I'm sure it's...
I would say that Homeland's probably one of the most diverse environments. The mission space is incredibly broad.
It's relatively new, and people realize it's like 10 years old, so it's still a culture that's still forming in terms
But the way I describe it is kind of, it's a petri dish that you've blown on and there's some color coming out of it, right? It's very new. I mean, so we still have some growing pains. But I think for me, I would say that still staying with continuous monitoring, and in these very tight budget times, there has to be a way to get away from the old style of audit-based saying that I'm safe because I have a 300-page binder here.
Right.
There is no clear way to walk away from the old style of security getting to continuous monitoring. There is a gap that I'm trying to bridge this year. It's going to be a challenge because I know that OMB has a mandate to enforce the A130.
Right.
So how do I still honor that, but moving away toward what I think has greater return on investment, which is continuous monitoring. So that's the ongoing reauthorization. That's going to be my biggest challenge this year.
Yeah, and hopefully there's some solutions out there that will allow you to reduce manual tasks, reduce perhaps reliance on contractors and things like that, with using some tools to help offset some of those costs. Ken Kartsen over McAfee, what's some of the big challenges that you're seeing your customers facing that you think you have to help them overcome, let's say, to get where they want to go with in cybersecurity?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's several that we see on a day-to-day basis. They range from mobility to port access control. I think one of us mentioned situational awareness. All of these are very high up on McAfee's list. One of the things we've been very successful at doing is, at least on the situational awareness side, is trying to take SIM, for example, security information management, and take it to the next level and say, let's not just house all the event data that's happened in our environment and ensure that we understand all the assets, but let's actually make use out of that information in near real time and be able to say, we saw a threat, we didn't just report on it and it took 24 hours to drive that report out, but we see that threat now and we know who that adversary is, and we can take it to the next level and say we understand who the adversary is, and we can attribute some of the things around them, and we can better protect our environment because we may know what they're going after. We understand if they're from Asia versus the Middle East or from the older Soviet Union states. So things like that. And eventually be able to automate all of this. A lot of it is automated today, but if we can automate it, we can drive down the costs around it and we can better protect the infrastructure.
Right. It's a conversation we just had, trying to get some of the things automated that have traditionally been manual tasks. General Croom, Charlie, what do you think some of the biggest challenges you see your customers facing that Lockheed's trying to help them overcome to move forward?
Yeah, well, I'd like to address it in more broader term in terms of the challenges on cyberspace, and I go back to the cultural issue of we've got to create an environment where the sharing is non-threatening to the participants.
Yeah, good point.
What is interesting to me is if a thief robs a house, we focus on the thief, but if an aggressor intrudes on a company's network, we seem to focus on what's wrong with the company in terms of them protecting themselves. And I think we have to change that attitude. So I believe as we see more legal enforcement become better, we're going to see a change in that culture. And also something we haven't talked about is our internet service providers. I believe they have a much greater role in protecting the network and stopping many of the threats long before they get to our companies or our desktops. And then I'll end with the last thought, risk management. We've got to be able to to place a dollar value, as you stated earlier, against what we pay for security and what that does for each of our companies or our corporations. And I think we're starting to see some models now where we can actually compare dollar expenses versus value.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's the right way to say it. I think rather than talk to executives about information security or cybersecurity, I think the conversation should be about risk management. That we need to manage these risks, because these risks really can have an impact on our stockholders' equity and our bottom line. So I think you're exactly where you need to be on that. Marty, Roesch, what do you think is some of the big challenges that you still see out there that need to be overcome to really get where we want to go?
Well, I think one of the things that I've been focusing on lately has been working to give people a framework to think kind of philosophically about the technologies that they're looking at and the application of those technologies, and getting them to kind of break out of the hype cycles that follow, especially new security technologies around. You know, we see things like next generation firewalls come out and everybody gravitates towards them, and they say, well, I've got a next generation firewall, so now I'm safe. Well, no, you're not. Right. Well, I bought an advanced malware protection system, so now I'm safe. Well, no, you're not. Right? We've been working very diligently about educating people about things like, hey, you know, when you're a defender, you have to think about the impact of the threats and the tools that you need and the techniques that you need before a threat shows up, when a threat is active, during an attack, and even after an attack has happened if they get into your environment. You need to have capabilities across all three phases of an attacker in your environment, and different technologies have different applications across those different areas of the threat continuum. And if you're not thinking about it holistically, about the entire problem that you're actually facing, and you're just throwing technologies at your perceived issues, whether it be audit compliance or regulatory compliance, things like that, you're probably going to be very disappointed when you realize you've been comprehensively compromised by a nation-state actor or whatever. So we've been working pretty hard on getting people to start kind of pulling their heads out of the technology and start thinking about the actual problem they're trying to solve, which is dealing with this threat across all three phases of how the threat actually occurs in their environments.
Yeah, it's a good point, because people, I guess it was called the principle easiest penetration. If you get good at one thing, really good security in one part of your network, the adversaries are going to look for another place to go. I mean, as you identify or you secure something, there's other parts of your network that are become the targets. And it used to bother me when we first started doing risk analysis a long time ago. You would have companies come in and they would take system one and they would do this drill down and study it for about 3 months. And I used to say, wait a minute, what you really want to do is the first phase of a risk assessment should be a breadth approach across all of your systems to identify where are we likely having issues, and there do the depth. Charlie, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's not only within your own system that you control, but as you improve your own corporation security, your adversary is actually now going to your supplier.
That's true.
And trying to come in through your supplier into your own corporate networks.
Right. We did, quite some time back, there was a couple of projects went on that looked at your dependencies for any given agency, how many dependencies you have on others for you to be, and it was scary at the time that anything goes wrong in maybe 100 different places could have an impact on your ability to do your mission. And so it raised a lot of eyebrows back then as to things we need to do. We need to move on to a couple other subjects, but before we do that, we need to take another short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Henry Sienkiewicz from DISA, Jeff Eisensmith from Homeland Security, Joe Albaugh from Department of Transportation, Marty Roesch from Sourcefire, Charlie Croom from Lockheed Martin Information Systems and Global Solutions, and Ken Kartsen from McAfee. We're talking cybersecurity. We've talked about progress. We've talked about priorities. We've talked about challenges. Let's talk a little bit about collaboration. It seems like to get where we need to go here, we can't all be working independent. There needs to be some collaboration. Let's hear from some of our government guests. Let's start with Jeff Eisensmith over at Homeland Security. It would sound like you guys have, just as part of your charter, an awful lot of folks that you need to worry about collaborating with. Can you talk maybe a little bit about how you're addressing some of those issues?
Sure. So we're very active in the Federal CIO Council in areas of things like digital mobility. We're working with DoD, with DISA, NSA, the rest of the federal space, and coming up with the use cases. What would be basic model for how we would do federal mobility to take advantage of things like large order buying, bringing down those prices, getting to a common lexicon and a common baseline, and that's some of the work that we're doing.
Right.
I think in the area of, once again, going back to Fedramp. This is
Right.
this
I guess that's a good
GSA.
example of collaboration there.
DoD. This is DHS. Doing all the work to get the accreditation where it needs to be. This year, actually, before the end of the year, we got our first one through the mill. So, and there are many others that are now queuing up.
Right.
That has the opportunity where you spend your money one time, and it's a force multiplier by an order of magnitude.
Right.
So I would say those two are probably the biggest things.
Yeah,
we're
and I
doing
think, with the
right now.
pressures on budgets, I think, it's going to force agencies which traditionally, culturally, did not really collaborate a lot, are going to be forced in that direction just based on the budget climate we're in. Henry, what do you think from the DISA standpoint? Where is that collaboration important?
Sure, and there's a few critical areas. I think first is that notion of sharing and collaboration. I mean, how do we share threat information across not just the department, but across the whole of government, and as importantly, with our industry partners.
Right.
We have the DIVMET, the Defense Industrial Base Network, where we've done collaboration.
Right.
The question is, how do we expand that, again, echoing what General Croom said, so that it's not as if it's a penalization for identifying problems, but there is a reward for helping the environment, the entire ecosphere, to get stronger. How do we share best practices? We inside of DISA have collaborated with DHS, for instance, on how to find the best practices for DDoS,
Right.
and how do we use those and proliferate those across the rest of the government. Common approaches that we've already mentioned: Fedramp, Cloud Broker, mobility, using common contracts like DISA has gone in partnership with GSA
Right.
for satellites. How do we use and leverage those types of enterprise licensing agreements across the entire federal space? And then the final one is, how do we come to grips with one identity management solution for the rest of the government? And you're seeing a lot of it. We've talked about PIV, we've
Right.
talked about PKI. It all revolves around common identity management.
Right. I think that's some excellent points again. Joe Albaugh, what do you think in terms of collaboration? I remember at Treasury when we went to anonymous reporting in the financial industry, we learned a whole lot, because there was a fear of, people didn't want to talk about things, vulnerabilities, because they felt like, it could hurt their reputation publicly. So, went to more anonymity in that. But how does transportation look to collaborate across with your partners?
Well, looking at and actually touching on what was just said about the best practices piece, I think there's a lot of good work that's occurring down in the operating administrations of the departments. Taking advantage of the technologies that already exist and looking at new ways of rewiring or reworking them to do things that maybe they necessarily weren't anticipated or intended to do initially, but what would come out with a strengthening posture of security, and getting those out of those operating administrations and getting them shared across government, especially when we're talking about trying to come up with innovative, cost-effective ways of doing
Right.
business. I'd rather look at the suite of technologies and processes I have already to see if there isn't a better way of doing it than looking at that next new cool technology
Right.
that's out there and trying to bring that in. I think there's a great opportunity here to share that sort of thinking, that sort of engineering across government, and it's being done, as was mentioned with DDoS and how to protect against that. I think, with respect to a lot of the initiatives that we have in front of us, I think there will be even more ways of collaborating to show folks how to do more with what you have.
Yeah, terrific. I want to shift gears and talk about the future here, like we always do at the, try to begin looking out as opposed to today. And I'd like to hear from all of our panelists here your sort of vision for where this is all going. The question is, I used to ask the question, are we going to have a digital Pearl Harbor someday before we actually get these problems addressed? But rather than view it that way, the question, I guess, is, do you think we'll get proactive enough, and in the future we'll be looking to where we won't have to be worried about these problems the way we are today, and we'll be able to sit down at our computers and not have that fear that I better, somebody else is going to get into my machine and so forth. What do you see, Marty, Roesch, as the future? What's it look like for you, your minute-and-a-half version of what that looks like?
So really what we're looking to be able to do down the road is provide visibility and control across the entire threat continuum before, during, and after an attack shows up on the network, at the endpoint, on mobile devices, in virtual data centers. Being able to do these things and deliver continuous capabilities at all phases of the threat that we see out there today. Being able to do this at the network with a single unified platform where we can deliver next-generation firewalls, next-generation IPS, advanced malware protection, and also being able to get beyond the network and being able to really effectively give people the capabilities to think about security beyond just, here's a box I put on the network and it does a job, and that's security today. But now being able to instrument the host, get telemetry, give people information superiority so that they can start protecting themselves much more effectively, and when there is a break-in, that they have the information and the capabilities to be able to rapidly scope it, contain it, and remediate it, get it out. And we're seeing success with that now. We have customers who are going from, I just got popped by the latest Java 0 day to I'm clean in 40 minutes, and that's real progress. Yeah,
terrific. Ken Kartsen, what do you think? What's your version, your minute-and-a-half version of where this is all going in the future?
Yeah, for myself, and I think a lot of people at McAfee, we see technology in general as it's about to take a huge leap forward. If you look at the last 10 or 20 years and you think about where we've come from, it's amazing. But I don't think we've seen anything yet.
I agree.
We're starting to talk.
We've barely scratched the surface of where we can go with a lot of things.
It's unbelievable. We're starting to talk about artificial intelligence and gesture-based capabilities, where this could inflict so many different or impact so many different things we do within security. Whether you're thinking about identity, what if I could use gesture-based to say, this is me, and that system's going to understand if it's really me or not, based on past experience. The same thing with the access to systems, stuff I may be downloading off critical systems or classified systems. It's going to change the spectrum of how we look at our infrastructure, how we understand if it's protected, and if it's telling us something is wrong in the environment, instead of us trying to see an event from packets that went across the wire. So I think we're about to see the best things to come.
Wow, terrific. I agree with you. Joe, Albaugh, what do you think, Joe? What's your crystal ball look like for out there?
Well, it's, the cautiously optimistic approach with things. It feels like it's a cat and mouse game. We proactively move down certain paths, and the actor shifts focus. And you couple that with the increased complexity of technology. I mean, it gets more and more complex. To provide the end user with a much simpler interface and capabilities. I think the way that and there's been a lot of energy around it is to move to build security in rather than bolt it on, and the software assurance. You touched base on the firewall solution. Certainly, if we had secure apps, we might be having different conversations about that and building it in. I also I feel as though you touched on it about the risk management conversation with senior leadership. As we become trusted advisors and talk their language and normalize between the very complex cyber world and their world, I think. We reduce that response time. We reduce that decision time in proactive mitigation steps.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. General Croom, you've been involved with this subject for quite some time, so you've seen it from where it was a long time ago to where it is today. Where's it going tomorrow?
Yeah, Jim, I'm like my teammates here, very positive about the future. We've got better intelligence. We're embedding security into our software and hardware. We're designing it up front. We talked about how we're now trying to develop a model for risk management, and I think we're going to see that very soon, and how we can expend dollars and why, and education, clearly, so the foundation. So we are becoming less reactive. We are becoming more anticipatory and proactive. And I'll go back to we're seeing, I think, an increase in law enforcement, and I think in the future you're going to see international agreements that we go after the source of these aggressors.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's coming. Jeff Eisensmith, Jeff, what's your crystal ball look like? What's it look like for you down the road here? Where's this all going?
All right, so I think a rising star on the horizon is going to be cyber kill chain. I think it takes advantage of two really major things here: knowledge management of what has gone down before and anticipating what's coming at us. And it also gives you real-life metrics that we're able to build real honest-to-God business cases of what we need to get the infrastructure where it should be. Because if you're getting broken too low in that chain, you know you have to react quickly, right? I think gone are the days of where you push a piece of paper over to the CIO that says, there's the number for what I need, okay? Today's day is one where security professionals have to build a business case that says, clearly articulated, here's why we're broken, here's how I need to be positioned, and here's the way to do it. And I think that cyber kill chain is a big part of that.
Right. Good points. Very, very good points. Henry Sienkiewicz. Henry, where do you see this all going, and what's in your future, and what about a book I'm hearing coming out in your future?
Okay. Well, thanks for the shout out, Jim. So a few things. I think when we've looked at this whole problem set, I mean, we've looked at the governance layer, and we've talked about that here. We've talked about the people layer here, and we've talked about the processes as well as the technology layers. And as we've moved into this proactive environment, I think we're going to get much more confident as we've embedded and we've built in security all the way through and across all of the fabrics. I mean, it's a fascinating time, especially as we see the onslaught of new innovation coming down the pike.
Right.
I mean, I think we're in a great space and a great time to be in this profession. And for anyone who's involved in it, I mean, I think we all have very, very exciting times in front of us. Although, while I'm very positive, I'm still a little concerned. I think that if we ever get to that point where we believe that we're proactive enough, I think we've kind of failed. Because if it's,
we can't get complacent.
We can't get complacent, because I think it's safe to say that on the day that we've let down our guard, we aren't going to be proactive enough. We can't sit back because the silos are gone.
Right.
The connectivity across the entire world is here, and the supply chain and all these other factors, as we've dealt with our coalition partners, our other mission partners, the rest of the federal government, our vendor partners, absolutely means that we've got to be on guard all of the time.
Right.
Not to say that we've got to put the walls up, but we've got to be secure, and we've got to be reliant, and we've got to be diligent. And I think that's my takeaway message on that. I mean, there's going to be constant diligence against a dynamic adversary. And that's sort of the role that we here in this room and every one of your listeners really has to help us with, is to figure out how to be diligent against this new ever-changing dynamic threat.
Right. Because if we have learned something with the terrorist attacks and things like that, that a tool, malicious code being a tool in the hands of the wrong people, will be used. It's not like, so we need to recognize that there's always going to be threats out there looking for ways to attack.
Right. Okay. And then I'll shift a little bit.
Sure.
The second book comes out at the end of March, beginning of April. I'm really excited about it. It's called Untangled.
Okay.
And what I was looking at was this idea of that we live in this media-centric, Twitter-driven world.
Right.
And the question is, how do we find enough distance in our lives to be able to step back from it? I mean, we are constantly entangled by this whole volume, velocity, and variety of things around us.
Right.
And the way I look at it is that we use a thing called active contemplation, a variation of St. Augustine.
Right.
But it's the way that we drive distance, and we drive that distance through embracing silence, solitude, and stillness in our everyday life.
Wow, terrific. Exciting.
Yeah.
Make sure I pick up a copy.
I will make sure you get a copy.
All right. Thank you, Henry. Let me do just a couple summary comments here. Another great show. Thanks. We did hear about continuous monitoring quite a bit in terms of priorities, challenges, progress being made. We had a number of conversations around identity, the importance of identity management. To get that one right can solve a lot of other problems. Workforce is going to be important, an educated workforce and people understanding their responsibilities. We do know that we've got some tough constraints. We've got budget climates that are going to force people to think of business cases and how to implement solutions that can get rid of some traditional solutions or obsolete solutions, or eliminate some of those band-aids of the past, so that the hit is not so big on that capital, the CapEx needed to do it. We talked about the sharing and trying to create sharing in a culture that's seen as non-threatening. That the sharing is going to be very, very important in this, and sharing best practices, experiences, good things that are happening and so forth, without creating a threatening environment. We said that we really got to talk about risk management. Let's not talk about information security. Let's talk about risk management and how important that is to our agency. We talked about complexities. We talked about situational awareness. We brought up the threat-based engineering, which was interesting in terms of a new way to think about things. And I think in terms of the future, what I heard from every one of you in different ways of saying it is, it's all about proactive. It's all about getting in front of the threats now. We've been there where we've been fixing things after they break. What are the kinds of solutions we can get that get out there in front of the threat to try, and if we actually do get attacked, where's the resilience factor, so as like Marty said, we can quickly get back to our steady state where we were without a lot of pain and process and money involved in that process. So again, a couple of thanks here. I want to first thank the panelists for taking time from your busy schedules to be here to share your knowledge and expertise in this.